Okay, so let's call this meeting to order. It's 6:06 or so. Um, the the agenda is very Spartan. So the way this is going to go is first we'll have the principals present their budget exploration, and then we can start discussing what is actually presented. Um, and then we'll go through with the with the rest of the agenda, which is really not much. Um, is there anything that anybody wanted to change or add to the agenda? All right, I don't see anything. Okay, so I don't, Bob, do you want to start this, or, pick a principle, any principle?
I don't mind starting, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
So after the last board meeting, the board gave some direction to Bill to come back with, a demonstration of what a roughly $500,000 reduction would look like and the implications to our students and to programming. So the principals all got together and spent a lot of time processing and talking it through. And in the end, we came up with this document that I think you all have. I want to be very clear, and each of the principals will probably say this numerous times tonight. But the last sentence of that first paragraph, these options are neither endorsed by the administrators, nor are they in a particular order. So we want to be super clear that these are not reductions that we support educationally, but really the only way to get to that number was to come up with something. And so these are the things that we came up with. So I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. And you'll see why, I think, as we go through them, why you might find us not to be supportive of them. So as you can see at the elementary level, we talked about 3 elementary teachers. And we talked about a percentage of an administrator. Those reductions would create some pretty significantly large class sizes, a couple of buildings, and would obviously create some need for other remaining administrators at the elementary level to take on some additional tasks, which will have an impact, of course, the buildings that they're currently in, and so on and so forth. And then at the secondary level, the other percentage of an administrator, which would bring us from 2.6 to 2.0. And then getting into some programmatical reductions. And these were really selected based on student numbers as far as enrollment. And so trying to find the ones that had the least impact as possible, knowing that everything has an impact at this point. So the Chinese language program, a 1.0 FTE. The Journey East program.
Bob, excuse me, Chairman of the Budget Committee, Mr. Winrick, would you like me to share this document at this time while people are talking about it?
Sure. I assumed that everyone had seen this document.
The board members have.
This isn't a public document yet? Go ahead and share it then, please.
You got it. Okay.
So anyway, so continuing on, the Journey East program, which really has 2 parts to it from a financial standpoint. And we can come back to that and talk a little more about that. I'm sure you'll want to at some point. But there's a local contribution that goes into the budget line in social studies every year, which helps offset the cost of that program. And there's some staffing implications around the director, coordinator of that program as well. And then the last one at the secondary level was 1 FTE of a music educator, reducing in half the number at the music department. So we would go from 2 to 1. All those total together, as you can see at the bottom, gets you just under $500,000. And just to reiterate, I know it's going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse on this one, but I want to make sure I'm super clear that the administrators are chiming in if they wish. but the implications to this are quite far and quite wide. And I would say that particularly at the secondary level, and the elementary folks can speak to their implications more in detail. But at the secondary level, to get to the kind of dollar amount that you were asking for, the full board was asking for, requires personnel. And personnel in a school our size is programming. And so there are no reductions that we can do that don't eliminate, or in the case of the music program, dramatically reduce our ability to run programs. And so, that being said, I think that speaks to a little bit what the full board conversation was last time around attracting other students from tuition towns and things like that. This will make that significantly more difficult to pull off. So that's where we left that. And then page 2 of the document, just for you to see that if these other alternatives do not hit the 500 number, but they provide some alternative thinking for you guys to consider as you move forward. These may not be brand new thinking to you. A lot of these come out of some thinking that came from Bill and his cabinet, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And we revisited it at our request and not at Bill's, and laid out exactly what the staffing would look like and how those possible scenarios could save some funds. And just to give you guys that information as you were to move forward and consider long-term considerations. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to have the other guys jump in or to have some questions from the group.
I think unless there are burning questions, it's probably easier to just have everybody go through it and we can discuss it in a lump. But I want to, while I have interrupted the flow here, I want to thank you for, you and the other administrators for doing this incredibly difficult exercise. I mean, as you stated, this is not a recommendation, nor is it anything that you support educationally or programmatically, but simply to have these discussions and put the end of these programs and positions down on paper is incredibly difficult. And I apologize for asking you to do this, and I thank you for actually showing us what this looks like. I think this is important for us to realize as we go forward that, we've exhausted pretty much every other option.
Joe, just if I could add to that, you're absolutely right. And the one thing I will say, I feel like it's my duty as the administrator to tell you this, that you probably suspect that morale of the teaching staff during a pandemic is probably not where we'd want to be. And that's no fault of you guys or us. It's just the nature of teaching remotely and dealing with, all the complications of a pandemic. I will add that when the board, and it's not the first time that a board has asked to conduct an exercise of this nature, I will tell you that every time this happens, we have to talk to people and we have to tell them that these are things that we're talking about. And these are jobs. These are livelihood. I mean, the impact to the kids notwithstanding, that's a whole nother area. But the impact to families and to kids and to the teachers as we talk about this does not help the morale issue. And the more times we go to the well to have those conversations, the harder it is to rebound from that. And I just need you guys to understand that, because there's an element somewhere down the road, and maybe we're already at the precipice of this point, but at some point down the road, you start to lose good teachers because they don't feel safe. They don't feel that the programming is secure, and they seek other employment in other places. And so that has a huge impact. As you know, we had a pretty significant turnover this past year, some of which were retirements, but some of which were not. That morale that hit to morale can be really damaging to a staff and the long-term quality education that they're able to offer as a result. So I just need you guys to know that as well. And so, yeah, it's an exercise, but it doesn't come without a cost. So, but thank you for your thanks.
Joe, you have a hand from Pam Bernardo.
Okay, go ahead, Pam.
Thanks. I'm gonna apologize ahead of time. The internet here, on top of this mountain is never good, so there's always a delay. But I just wanted to add 2 points to Bob's explanation about this, and thank you for that. Number one, these are not in any priority order. They're simply listed. And just another point was we really looked at this in terms of the whole West River District, not individual buildings. And I think that that's really important as we start to coalesce our buildings into a school district.
Thank you. You good on hands, Bill?
We're good on hands.
I would welcome any other principal that wants to weigh in or discuss the process, or add to what Bob had to say, or if we want to just let what Bob said stand, we can move on from there.
I think I saw Scotty's hand, Joe.
Okay, go ahead, Scotty. I got 3 people
I can
on
only,
video.
yeah, I can only see blue hands. I can't see human hands.
Well, I want to let you, the board, know that we, the administrators, totally understand the situation you're in, and no one owes anyone any apologies. We did this work and we learned from it. I would say that one other aspect of this is that we're hopefully next fall going to be coming out of a pandemic, and there are a lot of other factors in play when you start adding to class size. For instance, in my building, I certainly would be. I would be 2 days a week. I would be in 2 cohorts. If I had large class sizes like 24 right now, I'd have to go 12 and 12. That probably, I don't know, but that may be the case in the fall. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that that could be a ripple effect. But also, when we're talking about these kids are coming back from the pandemic, they've had a year and a half, they'll have had a year and a half of remote learning, coupled with some in-person learning. And I just want to make sure that we keep in mind the fact that the kids' needs are growing right now, and the gap in terms of what children are able to do widens between children who live in poverty and children who do not. And those are concerns of mine. I really love the kids at my school, and I love my staff, and I really hope that we can think of all of them as well as the taxpayers when we're making these kinds of decisions.
Thanks, Scotty.
I do not have any more hands, Joe.
Craig, Pam, anything you want to add? I don't see a hand, but I'll ask.
No, there's nothing that I really need to add. I would just echo both my colleagues' comments about careful consideration about how this affects not only our kiddos, our staff, but our community as we start to look at these. And again, these were not easy concepts and ideas to put in front of you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Craig, I saw the thumbs up. Thanks. Okay, so that aside, we can do people have questions for this? Opinions, board. Yes, Keegan.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and consideration that the admin team has put into this, and I do understand and can appreciate the impact that comes from this process and the communication that has to happen with teachers. I understand how heartbreaking and uncomfortable and unpleasant it is. And my heart is with you and with anyone who would be impacted, by everyone who would be impacted by this board's decision. I'm curious, Bob, you had mentioned before that when you were considering looking to find the areas that would have the least impact on, or that would impact the fewest number of students. Can you tell me more about how many? I'm aware that you have like a French program and a Spanish program. You know?
No, just Spanish and Chinese right now.
Spanish and Chinese. Okay. Can you tell me about how many students are currently a part of the Journey East program or are enrolled in the
Right. So
Chinese.
yep. So the Journey East program, if you're new to us, is a program that runs a semester-long academy every other year. So on the off year, when we don't have the academy and go to China, typically the Chinese exchange comes to us from the Inner Mongolian Arts, from Arts College. This year, the current school year is a visiting year. In other words, they would have been coming to us. Last spring, our trip was canceled, obviously due to COVID. So we are on schedule to next year plan for the trip to happen. So we would be sending kids. We do have typically, and the numbers have varied over the years. It's gotten smaller in recent years as our enrollment has dropped as well. But I want to say, 15 would probably be a max of kids that would go.
No.
No?
Sorry, Bob. No, 16 is the max
16,
at this
okay.
point, and it's largely monetary as far as how much money we have impacts how many kids we're able to bring as well. So we said 16 is our max of kids currently.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jesse.
Sorry, didn't mean to hop in like that. I just wanted to make sure it was correctly stated.
Yep. No, definitely. I was close, but yeah, 16. So those students and a lot of the students who were signed up to go last year would potentially, if they are still here and they haven't graduated, would potentially seek to try to get in the program again to be able to take the trip next year. So, but yeah, so on average, so if you average that out every year, the average number of kids per year is 8. I will say though, and many of you have been involved with the program, that the number of kids that are impacted are not just those kids who are enrolled in it, but the entire K-12 community, particularly in the year when those the visiting Mongolians come and perform for our entire student body, K-12. And even in the year that we visit, our performance then comes back and goes to the elementary schools as well with our kids. So the broader community at large also benefits from that. But the average number of kids per year, when you do the math, is 8.
Thank you.
It was a long answer. Sorry.
I appreciate the time. And we need to be well informed of what these decisions are and how they're being impacted. Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking for blue hands. Al, go ahead. I see a hand.
This is a question for Lori. So did you come up with that magic number for Townsend, Newbrook, and I'm sorry, Newfane and Brookline in terms of the tax rate that we would still hold on to that 5%?
Right, so it's the 5% hold harmless means that the unified tax rate could not drop below $2.05. Otherwise, Townsend would lose the protection, as Jamaica lost it 2 years ago. And then Brookline and Newfane, it's $1.98. So that's that 5%.
Okay, so if the unified tax rate were to drop below 205, then we would lose those, many of the towns would lose those protections of 5%.
Well, only Townsend would lose the protection if it dropped below 205, depending on where it landed. However, you would be paying less of a tax rate. What it means is that the following year, when your budget,
Right, that's what I meant. Yeah.
But if you got down to $1.98, that's what Townsend's tax rate would be. Of course, it has to run through the CLA, which has had a major impact on both Brookline and Jamaica this year. A 5% drop in Brookline and a almost 3% drop in Jamaica on the CLA. So that's pushing the tax rate up even further. Newfane and Townsend remained largely the same, little tweak, but not that much.
Okay, so say if we wanted to target somewhere between 205 and 210, 212, what would that mean in terms of a needed reduction?
Sure. So let me just get to that screen. So basically 420 gets you to 206. Now I'm going to, say this with the caveat that not all the numbers are in yet, right? So there's different things that can happen. For instance, the yield can go up, which I believe it probably will go up. It may not go up as high as it did last year, but when the yield goes up, the tax rate comes down. The equalized pupils are not finished yet. They were supposed to be, but I found a large error in another district. So, a state error actually. So those are all being recalculated. So those probably won't be out for a while yet. And then the exclusions can change also. So, 206 is as close as 205 that I would want to get to, but I think it's more in terms of, you pick a target and then we work with fund balance to balance that out, if that makes sense. So, if the yield goes up and the tax rate goes down, we put less fund balance towards the tax rate. Does that make sense?
It does. And right, so that we do think that the yield's going to go up and tax rate down. So that makes sense. So what would 210, if we targeted 210, what would that mean for a reduction?
So if you reduce the budget by 210?
I'm sorry, $2.10 unified tax rate.
Oh, okay. So you're talking like 400. 207 is like 380, so you're getting in there, in that range, right? So probably, yeah, about 300, 320 roughly.
Okay. And then, so that's assuming, so if 210, it could drop again to 207, 208, depending on the yield.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah, and the equalized pupils. So right now I'm figuring on the old equalized pupils. The equalized pupils for West River did go up very slightly. But again, I believe with all of the recalibration that's going to happen and the equalization that will happen, it'll probably come back down a little bit.
Okay. And do we have any movement on the excess spending threshold? You heard anything yet on that?
No.
Still no?
No, I doubt that will change.
Okay.
I don't think it's changed in the years that I've been doing this. That number is usually solid. It's they play with the yield, and that all has to do with the projections for the ed fund, and what does the sales tax income look like? What all of those different pieces of the ed fund. So, and that may not happen, to be honest, right up until they changed the yield 1 year just before town meeting. So
Yeah.
we may not know that.
Got it. So I wasn't meaning the changing in the excess spending threshold, but the actual relief from the excess spending, which that has been, no word on that yet.
No, again, when you're only one of 7 or 8 districts that is over the threshold, it doesn't have a lot of clout up in Montpelier, right? So,
Joe, you have a hand from a board member, Keegan.
I see.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura. I'll come back to it.
Let that conversation finish.
No, it's a good start. We'll come back to it.
Okay. Go ahead, Keegan.
A question I have has to do with, we know that this budget that we're working in right now for fiscal year 22, the first draft of it would mean a 12% tax increase in general. And we know that that is beyond the scope of what a lot of our residents can sustainably expect, based on our last few meetings of looking at the projected tax rate of continuing to go up. And it doesn't really level off for another, you know, what was it, like a 5 or 6 years? Fiscal year 26 is when we start to kind of see it leveling off.
I only went out to 25, I think, and it
Okay.
was continuing to increase that, you know.
Okay. So we know that current practice and the current plan isn't a sustainable model for a lot of our communities and for a lot of our community members. And it's unfortunate. I do wonder about the option to take the, I'm not going to say recommendation because that's not what this is. Looking at the reductions that the admin team had put together, would it be possible to say, all right, for fiscal year 22, this is what we're not going to have run. And then when it comes time to look at fiscal year 23 to see if equalized pupil counts change, to see if the funding model changes, to see if there is going to be an ability to fund things like this going forward, would that be a possibility to even have the conversation if we're going to pause for 1 year and then we'll pick it up and try again when we can afford it? Would that be a possibility? Kind of like a layoff, but not like a layoff. You know what I mean?
Just to clarify, I see Bob with his hand up to respond perhaps, or maybe do the same thing I want to do. Just to clarify, you're asking, what if we take the budget exploration that has been prepared and actually implement it for a year and then try and take a step back to where we were if it's fiscally possible?
Or responsible to do so.
Okay. I'll let Bob respond to that, but I think most of the changes that would be made at the high school with respect to Journey East and the Chinese language program, once those go, they don't come back. But Bob, I'll let you, that would be my opinion on that, but Bob, you go ahead and.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, having been an administrator now for 15 or so years at the building level. I've never seen a reduction come back, not once, not ever. And part of that is just because once it's down, then you're comparing it to a previous year. And so if you add something back in, it looks like you're adding on to the budget, and taxpayers don't like to see that. That's part of it. The second part of it is the staffing of it is really hard. We're incredibly lucky, to take the Chinese program, for example, to have a Chinese teacher. A lot of schools can't find Chinese teachers. And so if you eliminate that program for a year, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to find someone else to come in and be able to be qualified to do that, and someone who'd be willing to work and live in this community. So that's also a challenge, is that another one of the challenges in bringing things back. But yeah, you very rarely, if ever, I've never seen it happen.
I'm just trying to help us find an opportunity, right? Like our current budget plan that we've all seen isn't sustainable. And we asked for these reductions to have the conversation. If it's possible, if we could afford to keep these programs, then we would, right? So I'm just curious if, after things are able to be righted, as we right the ship, as we're getting our financial things under control, as we're monitoring our spending, I would like to think that we could be able to re-offer something. Just because it goes away doesn't mean it has to stay away. It would just mean that we would need to make it a priority, right? I apologize for thinking out loud about that.
Bill, I see a hand there. Al, I see a hand. Bob, I see it. Bob, is yours a response there?
A little bit, I guess. I would just say that, when you think about what you can afford, you have to think about what you can't afford to lose too. And I think that's one of the ways to look at this. Like it is about money for sure, and I get that 100%, and the tax rates and the implications for people who are struggling to pay bills. But it's also about a sustainable educational plan for your students for generation to come. You guys are at, and I praise you, Keegan, for having the tough conversation. I think it's important. I think you have to throw those ideas against a wall and see what happens. But I guess I would say that you my advice would be, and having served on a board and having been an administrator, is you have to start thinking about this from the long game and not the short game. You have to consider certainly what next year's tax implications are. But if you're not thinking 5 years down the road right now, then the decisions you're making are, I don't mean this in an offensive way, I hope you don't take it this way, but they're short-sighted because you're only looking 1 year at a time. And I guess that would be my, I don't want to sound too preachy about this, but I really feel like you're changing the educational offerings for a generation of kids by eliminating programs such as these. And then next year, if things don't change and you have to cut more, you begin to circle the drain educationally. And then you're talking about, well, what do we do now? And like I said, all of our programs, with the exception of like core subjects, which might have 2 to 3 people teaching in it, all of our programs, our unique programs, our elective offerings, things like that, are usually one-person departments. So the program is a person. And if you're going to get big bucks out of a budget, you're talking people and benefits, and you're talking programs. It's really, nickel and diming supplies and equipment, things like that will get you so far. But I guess the reason that we offer the other 2 things to consider on page 2 is that we really believe that the nature of the kinds of reductions that this will make are going to be incredibly detrimental to the welfare of our kids. And not just for next year, but in the long term. If we start thinking about this from a district perspective, like Pam had mentioned, and we start thinking about it from the standpoint of what's the long-term plan? Can you sell a short-term bump in taxes if you have a good long-term plan to show them? Maybe you can. Depends on how you go about that, I suppose. But I think that would be the angle I think I would try. But again, that's I feel like I'm on my soapbox. I'm going to get back off and mute myself.
All right, Bill, I think you had a hand up next, and then Al.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to follow up on what Keegan was saying, that the elimination of positions for a year are incredibly difficult to bring back. Bob talked about the reality of a bump in the budget. I'm just talking about those people go off and get other jobs. And so, if you don't have the Chinese teacher, which I think it's incredibly brave and important to have these kinds of conversations, it's very difficult to find a Chinese teacher in 9 months if you're like, oh, now we can do it. So just important context to think about. The decisions you make are somewhat permanent because they're not as flexible as interchangeable parts. So I just wanted to add to that.
Thanks, Bill. Al?
Yeah, I would just agree with Bob. It is very easy to become reactionary when you see a large number like that. Absolutely. But I do believe also that we have to think long-term. And I know Keegan, you're very interested in long-term planning. So I think that's what we need to consider. And yeah, there may be some painful discussions, such as, do we need to close a building? And this is a discussion we had, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 3 years ago. And when we had that discussion, I believe it was a hot June night at Dutton Gym, it was a flat out no from the community, a big fat no. So I think we've kind of tested the waters, and we know where a lot of people in the community stand. So yeah, there's that fine balancing act between how much can we potentially increase the budget, what programming are near and dear to our hearts and to the communities. So yeah, I think we have to thread the needle, and it's not an easy task, but I don't think just a draconian cut of 500,000 in some key programs and affecting a number of teachers is the way to go. I know that we have a reserve fund that is a reserve fund for a reason, and that maybe there's some way to cobble together what Bob alluded to earlier about maybe nickeling and diming some things from the certain budgets that will not affect teachers. I don't know what that number would be, 50 to 100,000, something like that. And then cobbling that together with the reserve fund. Lori had mentioned that in order to hit 210, we'd need 300,000. So maybe it's 100 plus a couple hundred in the reserve, something like that. I think that might be a better way to look at it. Maybe at least for this round of the draft budget. Certainly don't want to, at least from my own opinion, I don't want to start looking at these. And I appreciate the fact that the principals put this on the table just for us to view. But not only to me does it indicate that this was a difficult task, but that this it has incredible meaning to our school and school system. And $500,000 is not easy to get to, and it's a major impact. Thanks.
Thanks, Al. Mike.
Al, that was really well said. And I was, so that does sound like a reasonable place to start for maybe for this round of discussions, especially to go to the larger board with. And I'm also just thinking about, we lose kids in our own district to like the Career Center and down to Brattleboro High School and things like that. And this almost feels like, if we took some of those cuts, it'd be, death by 1,000 cuts. And, we're making our own school less attractive at the same time to the very students who are most likely to go here. So that's a big concern to me. But I did really like what Al just said. And I think that sounds like a reasonable starting point for this meeting. Okay.
I just want to, Keegan, you're next. I agree with you, Al and Mike. I think that this exercise has shown me as a board member that this is the path. This is not a path I'm willing to support. This isn't what our kids need. I mean, sure, we can make these draconian cuts and make the tax rate work, but that's not our only thing that we need to keep in mind here. I think the one thing that if we do back away from this and come up with for lack of a better word, I'll call it a Band-Aid solution to this, where we draw on our reserves and we make some cuts and we have a more modest tax increase, that we need to commit as a board. And I would put this into the budget committee recommendation that we will not do this again. I mean, we know from discussions, and I can have Lori probably help with this, or Bill, that, if we cut this year, next year, we're going to be looking for a number almost twice the size of the number we're looking for this year to just stay even again. And those cuts are going to be that much worse and that much harder to do. So we fix it for a year, but we absolutely have to change the way we do this, looking at the alternatives that the administrators presented us, where we change a little geography and we change a little tradition, and we re-look at how we as an entire district provide education, because the ability to find a way to do it the way we've always done it, because it's the way we've always done it, is gone. So, Keegan, you're next.
Joe, on that note, you and I agree. What we have been doing isn't working, and we've identified that we've kind of hit that wall where the kicking of cans and deferring maintenance and not, I don't understand how it's come to be here, but this is where we are, and it's very sad and it's heartbreaking. It's hard for the communities to have a conversation like the topic of closing schools. It's going to be hard for families of current students and alumni to think about how things are going to change and look different. But I also know that our current pattern of practice isn't working, and that's why we're here having this conversation. So if we want to let the first page of the document go for a little bit and talk a little bit more about the alternatives that do not bring us to that $500,000 aim, but get us between 164,000 and 224. I would love to hear some thoughts around how this would work. Alternative 2 would have the Jamaica Village School operating as a pre-K center, and Townsend Elementary would house kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and Newbrook would house 3, 4, and 5. I'm curious to see what some thoughts are around, you know, we're not going to make everyone happy, no matter what our conversation goes, but I am curious, a 3rd grader or a child that's in 3rd or 4th grade that lives in Jamaica or lives in Townsend, that experience of being on a bus from Jamaica to Newbrook is a pretty tall ask as well. I'm curious if we've done some studies around how long that would take a child to be on the bus, or what those implications are, if that's been reviewed or looked at, because they look strikingly similar to some other options that we had reviewed from that long list of 11 that we had last spring. So I would love some more insight into how we can repackage and rethink the education that we offer our communities, if it means moving children in buses for a long time, or longer time than they would be expecting.
Before
Joe, if I could.
far down. Yeah, go ahead.
So no, just because Keegan wasn't part of the board when, as Al refers to it, the hot June night. So after Act 46, the West River Board was created, and a task was given to myself and my colleagues on the cabinet. So the Director of Special Ed, the Director of Curriculum, the Director of Finance. And we were tasked to develop a school system that involved the entire district, and to lay it out with some very specific educational targets and some very specific financial targets. Our original task was to develop a system that came in at the average of the equalized pupil, and we were unable to accomplish that task. But we were able to accomplish a task of designing a system between the average and below the threshold. And that's where I believe, if I'm correct, Bob mentioned that when the principals were working on this, they asked for a copy of that presentation. And these were part of those analysis. So we did a deep dive into what was the best environment to deliver education to students. I'll let the principals talk about it more, but just for example, when you collect your K through 2 in one building, you are able to have opportunities for more direct instruction that is specific to literacy and math. I mean, you know all this stuff, but I'll just say it anyways. You have the ability for a first grade teacher who's really talented at math to teach first grade math to both classes, and the partner teacher to dominate in reading. You have the ability to cluster students that require intensive needs. You have the ability to cluster students that require additional services. So there are some opportunities for better instruction, more targeted instruction, and at a lower cost. But that does come with a trade-off, as you pointed out, of travel and of different and of tradition. So in 2017, my team was tasked with developing that plan. And as Joe and I think Al referred to, the shock value was poignant. You had over 600 people, and it was very silent. It was an interesting time in my career, and it started the conversations that have kind of led to tonight. But I'm going to stop talking and allow the principals to flesh out how they came to provide those options for you guys tonight.
before we go too far down the rabbit hole with these two, as a practical matter, the alternatives on page 2 of that document probably couldn't be implemented for the budget we're developing right now. I mean, those, in order to make those changes in where kids go to school and how that's done, we would really need to communicate with our public and talk to our voters and make that change. I believe the board has it within its power to actually do that without doing that, without having those conversations, and to just do that. But I don't think it's worth the ire that we would draw. But that, those serve as a place to start when we say, okay, this is the change, these are the changes that we're going to make this year to make the tax rate somewhat more manageable. And going forward, these are the kinds of things we have to look at in order to keep the tax rate from following that curve up and out of sight. So with that, any principals want to weigh in? Keegan, you want to weigh in?
I just have a follow-up question for you about that. If the alternatives that were offered on the second page of the budget exploration considerations, if they're not options for this fiscal year, I'm curious then, are we then left to continue to discuss the first page, which would be immediate implications and discussions around this fiscal year that we're talking about?
I think you're looking at this. This was information that we asked for. I don't think when we asked, when I was part of asking for this exercise, this exploration to occur, it was not my intention to then implement whatever was handed to me. It gave me information to have a discussion. And as I said before, I personally don't support this $496,000 cut. I think it's damaging to the long-term education of the children in the West River Education District. And I think it really has shown that we cannot continue to do what we've always done, and that we, looking at this from a 2-year perspective and saying, we will figure out a way to cut, between using reserves and making some cuts, we'll get down around 300,000 out of this year's budget increase to keep the tax rate around 210, 212, somewhere in there, much more manageable than 220. But that we will also at the same time then commit to a larger and, again, difficult conversation about how do we change the way we deliver this so that next year we're not looking at where can we cut another 300, 400, 500,000 out of the budget. We can't continue to cut those kinds of numbers and sustain the physical locations that we have and all the personnel. I mean, it's going to be buildings or people, and we have to have those conversations. And since alternatives 1 and 2 are buildings and people, I think it would be ill-advised of the board to move forward with one of those without consulting certainly the people in Jamaica and the rest of our district.
All right, so my follow-up question then is, the board tasked the admin team to do this work. If we aren't going to follow up on this work for this coming fiscal year that they've done, then I think you're absolutely falling into the situation that Bob had mentioned earlier, the impact of having the conversations. I'm confident that the principals had to have conversations with teachers already about this. And it's already out there. The toothpaste is out of the tube, right? Those conversations took place. Those feelings are hurt. We know that we need to change what the budget looks like, because last year we were looking at a 19% tax increase and then we whittled it down. This year we're looking at a 12% tax increase, and I know that that's not going to work for my community. So based on this work that the admin team has done, how do we move this conversation that we're having tonight forward so that we can say, all right, we're not going to end these programs, we're not going to let go of these positions, but here's what we are going to do. Is this where we're going to come back to the conversation around spending the reserves to make up for the difference? I'm curious how we move forward with a different number from where we are right now.
Al,
Sorry.
please.
Yeah, I think we just talked about this. I feel like we're on a merry-go-round. We had a lovely discussion about maybe looking at about 100,000 from the budget, and then potentially 200,000 from reserves. So I agreed with that. Mike agreed with that. Joe agreed with that. So I'm not sure what part we're missing. Yes, the programs that they presented, extremely painful. And we, at least I'll say the three of us, I don't know if you'll agree, don't want to go down that path. It was information, as Joe said, that we wanted presented to us. What would it look like? And yeah, when I saw it, it was as painful as I thought it would be. So yeah, I don't think that's where we want to go right now this year. And do we have to have some tougher discussions next year? Yeah, probably. And as I mentioned, that may involve closing a building. But I think one other thing that we haven't really looked at or talked about is the waiting study. Last March, I testified up at the Capitol, and then everything changed, right? COVID hit. So that waiting study was put on the back burner. But I was actually just looking it up, what would that impact if that were to be implemented all at once? And I think looking at Townsend, it was a 29-cent tax decrease if that were to be implemented. It's different town to town. And again, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find all of that information right now, and it may have changed, but probably not a whole lot. The waiting study will be significant, and the WCSU has put forward a letter. We have many advocates for the waiting study to be implemented. Now, will it be implemented all at once? I'm hearing no, it probably be phased in over a series of years, but that's okay. It would be relief for our taxpayers. And I know, Keegan, you alluded to earlier, we can't continue to do this over and over again. It's not working. Well, the thing that's not working is that 23 years ago, we went down this path where inequities have grown and grown and grown through no fault of our own. And now the legislation hopefully will pick this up and do the right thing, which will be tremendous tax relief. So that, as your chair of this board, I will certainly be fighting very hard for that. We may not see tax relief this go round for this year, but I can almost guarantee that we will see some sort of tax relief for the following year.
Let's hope, Al. I hope your crystal ball's shined up and working. Go ahead, Scotty.
Thank you for taking my hand. My job is to educate the kids that go to my school, and I've felt over the last 7 years I've grown more and more confident in our ability to do that, and I feel like my staff and the training that my staff has had and the support that we get from the central office is really it's appropriate. I really feel appropriately staffed, and our transition to COVID. I really feel like couldn't have happened if we hadn't been such a cohesive team that was ready. And to take from that right now, I totally get it. And Keegan, I understand. I live in Dummerston. Our tax rate is crazy. But I tell you, I can't imagine that we as a group would want to be inappropriately staffed or be unable to serve the kids or be only able to serve some of the kids appropriately. I would hate for that to be the case. And I feel really ready. for whatever the town of Newfane and Brookline and Townsend and Jamaica throw at us. I really feel ready. I feel like we've been very strategic. We're moving towards MTSS in a really prompt fashion, and I feel like we're learning a lot. But I can't imagine coming out of COVID how we could meet the needs of the kids in class sections that truly that we couldn't even fit the kids in the rooms. So I tell you, I can imagine how hard this is on you guys, and you're in the grocery store, and you have to talk with people who can't afford their taxes. I could just imagine. I'm not in that position, but I am in the position to know that I feel appropriately staffed and ready to go, and I think my staff feels the same way. Thanks for hearing me.
Thanks, Scotty. Oh, I'm in the waiting room. I don't see any hands. I just wanted to take a second. Leanne, you've been awfully quiet. Are you still with us?
I'm here, but I am in and out, so I'm catching about every other word. So I'm not commenting because I'm not sure I'm hearing things correctly.
Oh, no. Okay. I was just hoping you had some sort of opinion on all this as we were reading through it.
It's a really, tough decision. I'm looking on this. I'm looking at programming cuts at the high school, and as an alumni, I keep going back to when I was in high school. I mean, at that point, we offered 4 different languages by the time I graduated. There was Spanish, French, Chinese was just coming in, and Latin. And so it's kind of emotional for me looking at it saying, hey, in 20 years, how has this happened? So programming cuts I don't want to do, but the tax rate just keeps going up, and it seems like the same fixes keep being applied that don't really work. So I don't know. I'm at a loss.
Okay. Thanks. Just wanted to make sure you weren't lost in all this.
Only mostly.
Okay, so more questions, more discussion. I would love to see a combination of, reductions without, what can you do if we tap into reserves and try and find another, say, 100,000, Bill and Lori, and come to us with that sort of a budget, with Band-Aid. I'd also really like to give, if you can, project this out another year so that, let's look at the pain that comes if we don't make the programmatic changes, the changes in geography and the changes in tradition that we're talking about needing to make. To my way of thinking, we're really at a fork in the road here, and we can go down the path of, continuing to die the death of 1,000 cuts where we reduce and try and continue to run things. And eventually we're running, only the things we have to by statute provide. And that's not the education we necessarily want to be giving the children of the West River District. Versus we have the difficult conversation, similar to what Newfane and Brookline did years ago, where they realized that it just didn't make sense to have, those 2 schools, and they combined and they figured out a way to make it work between the 2 towns. We have a few more towns and a little more geography, but I think we can find a path forward there if we stay focused on the long game and the good of the students going forward. I mean, Bob was talking about generational changes, losing programming and the changes that get made. And it truly would affect a generation of students. The kids that are in 2nd grade now, what's Leland and Gray going to look like when they get there if we continue, a teacher here, a program here, that. So I think we have to commit to doing that. Is that doable, Lori, Bill?
Well, I'll go first. I don't know where Bill ended up on my screen, but Sure, it's, it is doable, and we've done that work actually, when we were doing all of the long-term planning. I had projected out from fiscal year 22 to 25, and I think for 22, I projected a $2.26 tax rate, and we're at 221 without any changes, so not too far off. So, what does that look like for 23? That's, we've done that work and can come up with that number. I'm just looking to see if I can actually pull it up really quickly, but it was a while ago now, and it's buried in Google Docs. So,
Joe, if you can let Lori look for that, Mike has a comment he'd like to
Yeah, I
make.
see Mike's hand up.
Okay.
Sure. I was just wondering if at the same time, I know it's, definitely nothing's baked into the cake yet, but kind of piggybacking off what Al said, I'm wondering if at the same time we do if we're going to look at what Joe was saying, maybe we also include the benefits of the weighting study if they're adopted, just so we can really give an accurate picture of where we are and reasonable things that we hope could happen to help us. Obviously, even if the weighting study is adjusted, we would need to control spending very, going forward so that we don't end up right back in the same spot. But it might mean that we don't have to cut a building. It might. I don't know. We'd have to see. So yeah, I mean, Lori, could you just kind of include a little blurb about that into the presentation, if we're going to talk about these other alternatives too?
To clarify, you're talking about what the weighting study could do?
Right.
Yeah, if it was rolled out over 3 years, which is, or
Right.
however many years, I'm sure they're not going to drop it in 1 year.
No, of course, but not like when either Al or you said, it could have been like 29 cents for Townsend or something like that. Well, that's a huge number. And I think that, for me, I think the psychological threshold for a lot of our taxpayers is the $2 mark. And if we can provide a great education for our kids, and if we can do it under the $2 mark, I think that gives us the time to stabilize and come up with a long-term plan, because I agree with what Bob said too. If you're only ever operating off a short-term plan, you're never really making progress. We do need a long-term plan, and that we can all work towards and, and grow with.
Just a clarifying question to what Al said. You were referring that 29 cents was if it all dropped in at once, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page with that it wasn't a 1 year drop.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fully aware that it's going to be spread over a number of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So if nothing changes, and you just, accept this budget, approve this budget, and put this budget forth, and then next year rolls around, I was looking at $2.37 for 23, if nothing, changes. And then the weighting study could have some amount of effect on that. I will just caution that if they do roll it out, it might keep up with the normal negotiated increases and the healthcare increases and the increases in, assessments and things like that. So, which is absolutely helps, but
It's significant. It could be.
It could be. Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, Lori, I just want to hear one more time. This year, if we don't do anything different, if we just reflect on practice and we think about what we can do differently, but we don't do anything differently, if we just think about it, our property tax rate is going to be $2.21. And if we follow the same pattern, just minimal increases, just, the regular, percentage increase for cost of maintenance and repairs and what have you, the fiscal year 23 property tax rate is going to be $2.37.
Or rough about.
Or right around there.
Mm-hmm.
And from other meetings where you've shared this information, that number continues to go up and go up and go up, right?
Right, so by, again, all projections, but I think we were at 264 for fiscal year 25
So
without
$2, yep.
any interventions.
So if we don't do something, then I think it's a pretty fair statement to say that the people that are living in our communities won't be able to afford to move into our communities to then access our school system. That is a significant property tax rate, significant. So I think we're absolutely on par here. We need to change. We need to think differently about what we're able to offer and how we're able to offer it. And I think we need to be serious about what we're going to do for next year. I understand having a long-term vision, the comfort that comes from a teacher to know like long-term their position is secure because their building is secure, because their district is secure. That matters. I really hope that we can figure out how to do this now, because it continues to look bleak, at least from the numbers that I'm looking at, considering how many of our community members are over the age of 65 and living on fixed incomes or unable to meet the financial needs of what our schools require with fewer and fewer students. So I think it's important to be mindful and for our community members that are here. If we don't have the hard talks and the hard conversations and really take a bite out of this, then it's not going to bode well. So thank you for clarifying what those projections were, Lori. I appreciate that.
Sure. One second, Al. I just want to clarify. No one has suggested doing nothing this year and putting forward the budget as presented, right? Just anyone who has, please speak up. Okay. Because you were talking about doing nothing this year, Keegan, and pushing it off another year, but no one has suggested doing that.
I didn't mean to imply that. I was just
Okay. I was
confirming that if we do nothing and if we do superficial cuts to the budget that don't really hit a significant number, then we're still going to have an increased dollar amount. Now I know like the governor had already projected, and from the release from the Department of the Treasury within, or the tax office within the state of Vermont, they were already projecting an average tax increase of like 9.4%. So our current standing is over 12. So I was just curious to see, like, I know it's going to be high. I know we're going to be impacted like every other community in the state, but I think that we need to take a significant reduction in the budget to have it have real impact and real meaning for our communities. That's just where I'm at. So I'll hold my questions and comments.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. I would hope nobody thinks that we're just going to sit on a $2.21 unified tax rate. That's certainly not where we want to be. I think we're speaking a similar language, but Keegan seems to want to work on the programs. But to something that you said earlier, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Yeah, if we do that, you're not going to be able to put that toothpaste back in the tube. If we take a more this kind of approach where we look at smaller segment, 100,000, something like that, plus some of the reserves, then that's there's nothing to unwind there. It is still fairly aggressive. I mean, we're looking at 300 of the 500,000. That's a significant cut, but it does not affect the programs, which, as Leanne referred to earlier, were very important and a part of her education and many others. So don't want to see that. One question, Lori, in terms of income sensitivity, I'm glad you raised this point, Keegan, about retired folks. Really, of our communities, how many actually would pay the full-fledged rate? And
Yeah.
So I've actually started to gather that information, and I don't have it all pulled together yet, but I did find some information on the state's website that says how many taxpayers paid or received an income tax or a property tax credit. And so we've called around to the town clerks to see how many property tax bills went out, that type of thing, and I haven't been able to pull that together. I just will caution that although somebody may not pay the full boat, so to speak, when the cost per student goes up, then the property tax credit goes down. So percentage wise, I'm looking at another district where percentage wise, the increase in it's hard to say this because it's like saying it backwards, but the decrease in the property tax credit is actually more than the increase of the actual property tax. So we just have to be mindful. That's all. I'm just cautioning that it's not, that it's, and it says this actually on the state's website. If you watch the tax presentation, to be mindful that it does affect those who pay income sensitivity.
right, totally understand that. And I think our cost per student did not really go up significantly, correct?
The cost per student year over year. Yeah, so my quick calculation on doing this, I did, and again, I don't have the numbers of how many people paid, but for example, in Brookline, because it's town specific, if somebody were to earn $50,000 and you're paying on a $24,000 cost per student, their income sensitive house education tax, so what they would pay, went up 12.86%. Whereas the person that is not paying on income, the tax went up 21.4%. So not as much, but it did go up. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I'll share this with the whole board maybe next time or another budget committee. I think it's a good idea because we do need to look at those scenarios and also, the effect that the CLA, and if I can just continue on this path, Joe, if that's okay with you, everybody. So, the CLA, of course, has a major impact on the tax rate as well. And the CLA for this year only went through March 2020. So, we're really anticipating that the CLA will be continue to fluctuate greatly next year as well. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. As I said earlier, in Brookline, the CLA dropped over 5%. And in Jamaica, it dropped almost 3%. So without doing anything else, right, even if you're down to the $2.10, that's an automatic increase based on those CLA numbers. So.
Thanks, Lori. Any more questions or discussion? Okay, so yes, Lori.
Sorry, I just had one other item to throw out that it needs to be discussed, and we did talk about it, or I did bring it up at the last board meeting, and it's the commitment to the food program. And I just want to make sure that that is out on the table. And at the last board meeting that I did talk about the fact that that revenues have been reducing in the food program. So we're looking at a gap there. And so that would actually be an increase to the current budget. I have not put it in yet because I'm still trying to work on other ways to fund it. But it is potentially out there that it could increase the budget.
What kind of number are we talking?
Well, right now it's 66,000, but I think I can get that down by half. So, which 30,000 is not sounds like a significant number, but on a $12 million budget, it's not a significant number. So, but it has to be put out there so that we understand, and the board can make a decision on their commitment to the program, whether to continue the way we're going or not.
Right. Thanks.
Mhm.
So if we don't have any more questions or any more discussion, I'd sort of like to see if we can agree on a recommendation to the board. Like we had put forth the proposal of using reserves and finding, say, $100,000 in cuts. We had asked a couple of, can you show us how this looks? Can you show us the impact of if we don't revisit how we do this and talk about structural and tradition, geography and tradition changes, what are we looking at next year to find to stay at a similar tax rate increase? We can present those things as additional work and sort of additional supporting documents to the board, but can we come up with a recommendation where we say a combination of reserves and 100,000 and present that budget as something that we think is workable for a year going forward, with a commitment to continue, with a commitment to then really start talking about how we don't do this again in another year. I'd almost take some sort of a motion to make it that official that the budget committee is going in that direction. It doesn't have any binding effect on the board, but it at least puts that sentiment in it codifies it. I see your face, Mike.
Al can have it.
Al, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make that motion to look for 100,000 within the current budget, and then 200,000 from reserves. Laura, could you correct me if I'm wrong, but is it about 575,000 that is currently in reserve?
572.
I'm sorry, close.
Wow, you're good, Al.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Al, do you want to speak to it?
No, I just think it's the pragmatic way to go. And certainly we definitely need to get into long-term planning and having discussions. I would say pretty much as soon as we get this budget approved, that should be the next goal, is to look at those harder questions, the buildings, things that will be more difficult.
Absolutely. Mike, you have anything to add as a second?
No, I think it's the prudent way forward, especially because we can still, we don't have direction from the board to take those other, we're looking at it, but they didn't tell us to go that far. So I think this is like a nice interim step, and, they could tell us that at the next meeting if it turns into a broader discussion, but that would have the full board present to have that discussion.
Okay. Bill, you have a hand. Bob, you have a hand. Keegan, you have a hand. Bill, you're muted. Uh-oh, he must be having internet issues. Okay, Bob, and then we'll circle back to Bill, and then I'll go to Keegan.
Yep. I just want to roll in a couple of other thoughts too as you get ready on this motion to consider it. One, the proposed position that I had given you guys as an ad, which regard the dropout prevention type of system. Lori is fairly certain that we can consider that using ESSER money. So that's not something you guys have to be thinking about at this point. Just want to take that off your plate for now. The position may still get added, and we'll come to you later when we formalize that, but I think the money will be coming from outside the local budget. So that's excellent news to be able to still do that. And then the second thing is a little less exciting. I just wanted to throw out there to remind you guys that your budget still does not include any buildings and grounds improvements in it as of right now. So I just want to remind you of that as well. And you had talked about bonds and so on and so forth, but so with your reductions that you're talking about, you're still not potentially taking anything out of buildings and grounds because you don't have anything in buildings and grounds. I think that's correct, right, Lori?
Fairly correct. Yeah, we did add a little bit to each of the maintenance lines for the preventative maintenance. So they could not do preventative maintenance.
What about the column work for LNG?
That is not included in this budget at all. I am anticipating there is a small amount of capital fund balance. So I'm hoping that that can cover it.
Bill, are you back with us?
I'm back with you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Go ahead. You had the hand next, and then
Thank you. A couple questions. One, the $100,000 that you're specifying, does it come from page 1 of the exploration worksheet, or does it not page 1 of the exploration worksheet?
I kind of thought we were leaving it up to the administration to give us guidance on.
Yeah, you know, page 1 is not anything that you supported or recommended. So, you know, if there's something on page 1 you decide you can support and recommend, then it can come from page 1. If not, you know, see if you can find it.
So then, as a follow-up, where are you expecting this $100,000 to come from? We zeroed out all the maintenance, and the direction from the board was find $500,000 and don't touch the maintenance. So I just want to be really clear. You want us to find $100,000, not touch maintenance, not touch page 1. I just want to be clear of the guardrails of the direction.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I am your employee, so I will follow your direction. So when you make your motion, I would ask that you include that level of detail. And then secondly, just a little history lesson. Last year at this time, it was a collective, we're going to hold our nose and present a budget. And we're back there again this year. So I highly encourage, I believe, Joe, you mentioned it, that the Band-Aids need to end because you keep repeating the same conversation in the last 2 years. Last year's solution was to zero out all the maintenance, and then we dealt with that reality and kind of got saved a little bit by some CARES money that came through for a pandemic that happens once every 100 years. So I would just highly encourage you, when you make your motion, be specific about the 100,000, where you're directing it comes from, and 2, to couple it with a commitment that you guys are going to have a budget out on March 24th, that on April 1st, you commit to long-term planning as Keegan has bravely communicated, and stick to it, because otherwise you'll be back here next year and you'll be looking at 800,000 because you'll have cut into the surplus and you're going to need to make some difficult choices.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, so Mike's hand is up, Leanne's hand is up, Lori's hand is up, Keegan's hand is up. That's the order they went up in, too. So there we are.
I'll be quick, but just to be fair, and I totally understand what Bill is saying, but we were on a path to consider some of these other options, and we took a step back because of the pandemic, right? We wanted to give some consistency and security to our communities. So that was one of the main drivers for why we didn't push forward with evaluating options further for this year. But Bill and Keegan and everybody is right. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. That's all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leanne.
Yeah, I was just agreeing that we can't keep doing these Band-Aid solutions and trying to pull money out of a budget where the money, there's nothing left to pull without programming or restructuring at this point. I was reviewing all of them and, I think we really need to look at more of the restructuring. The alternative one is less of a logistical nightmare than alternative two, and perhaps we should be referring to the board to go more along that line.
I think you're right. I think, those are there for the conversation that needs to happen as soon as this budget is passed. And that's the kind of commitment that we need, not only at the budget committee level, but at the board level, to not do the Band-Aid again. We're going to make some changes because we have to make the changes. Lori, you were next.
So I just wanted to follow up on what Leanne was talking about, where this is a very slim budget. There is not a lot of room. And what this will mean will affect programming because it will be supplies, it will be equipment, and that 100,000 will have to come from somewhere. And if it can't touch programming or staff or then those are the things that will be cut. There really is no other. It's pretty skeletal. I'm just putting that out there so you understand what the context is.
Okay, Keegan.
I'm feeling a little frustrated, right, by this conversation and by this process. We recognized last year when I joined the board in March that we're done kicking the can down the road, right? That was the phrase I heard when I was sitting in the library at Leland and Gray. We're done. We're not going to do it anymore. And yet here we are. This is a stopgap Band-Aid approach to fixing our issue. $100,000 in a very already slimmed down budget, as Lori said. You're going to be putting teachers in a position where they have to teach without the resources that they need to do their jobs well. You're letting kids know that, yeah, we're going to keep every option open and available, but they're not going to be resourced adequately. And I also feel that I'll offer my apology to the admin team because I don't think it was at all appropriate for us as a board to ask you to do the work that you clearly did, only for us to say, thanks for showing it to us. Thanks for having those hard conversations. We're not going to take it under advisement because it's too much right now. But find $100,000 instead. Borrow money from our reserve fund instead. I know that we don't want to have the hard talk. I know we don't want to let positions go. I know the impact that will have on our community and on our kids and on our families. I'm a teacher. I know what those conversations feel like. But I also recognize that our model isn't working. Shaving off just a little bit isn't going to do enough to have a significant impact. And we're still shortchanging the kids. We're still shortchanging the teachers. And we still have a building that we can't fix because we don't have a maintenance budget for it. We need to do more. We need to have a budget that I can be proud to say, this is what we're going to offer and this is what it can do. As it stands now, we collectively agree that it doesn't work, but going down to $2.10, $2.12, guess what? It's still too much. And it doesn't meet the needs of what our community can withstand. And relying on the income sensitivity and what all of that means, that's an unfair practice too. Most people don't qualify. And to say that some people might, so let's pass it through because some people will be okay. It's not a blanket amount of money. It varies. It could only be $20 that someone qualifies for. It's not the entire thing. So unless I really don't like how this feels. We asked the ad team to find the $500,000 and they did the hard work. They did it. They showed us what it is that we're looking at and what it all means and how it would impact our community. Yeah, it's bad. But to then say, all right, we're going to work in the reserves, we're going to do this, and we're not going to do it again, when we've already acknowledged that we have been doing it again and again and again. We need to do better. Our kids deserve it, our communities deserve it, and our teachers deserve it. So that's what I have for you.
Mike, you were next, and then Al, you have a hand up.
Okay, so to Bill's point about where's the money going to come from, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that these are the cuts that I would choose or anything, but I definitely support the program, but I'm wondering about, for the purposes of this budget and this 1 year, it doesn't really seem like Journey East is going to be a thing this year, right? It would have, they would be coming here though. Is that the thing? I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Oh, can I answer that, Joe?
Yeah.
Budget that you would be approving and the voters would be voting on for next year would be a travel year for our students to China. Travel is allowed, of course, by next spring.
Right. Okay. All right. So, all right. Well, I'm glad you corrected me on that, because I was going to say, if it was if it was something we could cut for this 1 year without taking the program off the table, that might be one thing. So I guess I'm back to square one. Let's leave it on the administration.
Can I just tag on to what Mike said? I just want to clarify one thing too.
Sure.
Thank you. It was cut last year as well. So I just want to make sure that we remember that last year it was pulled from the budget.
Okay, it was. Yeah, it was.
Well, for the current year we're in.
Okay. And to what Keegan said, I mean, I do agree with you, Keegan, in a lot of ways. But we also, earlier in this meeting, we said that we weren't gonna, we weren't sure that we could even make the changes for the next meeting. And one of the things that I remember is that we pulled back on was we were going to get surveys from the community to find out what they valued more and things like that. That was something we had talked about doing, back last summer before we pulled back on making structural changes. Maybe we need to revisit those conversations and see what the community values, and where the line is. I know we need to make the decisions, but with the most data possible. But again, that would all come after we get this budget done. I think we're talking about, I don't want to sound tone deaf because I totally get what you're saying. But at the same time, I don't see us making those big changes for the next budget, in my humble opinion. That's all.
Al, you were next.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, yes, we asked for this work to be done, but it clearly states, even in the worksheet, none of this is endorsed by the administrators, none of these cuts. So propping the administrators up as, hey, they've made all these sacrifices and showed us the path to $500,000. Let's take their path that they've created for us. I'm just not understanding that argument at all. Under duress, they were essentially said, all right, here, find us $500,000. They did that, right? They did the task that we asked them to do.
I'm
not
having a-
endorsing any of those.
Right, and I would like to speak to that. I think it's important for us, larger picture, taking a step back from this conversation, asking a principal, asking a building leader to do this work, knowing full well that they're going to have conversations with teachers and with staff to let them know that this is a question, this is an ask of the board. I think we need to be less willing to say, why don't you go float this idea? You know, I think we need to be really cognizant of every time we make an ask of our administration, they have to have a conversation with a teacher or with a staff member in order to find $100,000 or in order to find $200,000 or $400,000. It's a big deal on the receiving end of those conversations. So if all we wanted to do was have a, let's just take a peek, let's just twinkle our toes in the water and see what that would look like, that is a very different ask than what we just had our principals do. I'm sure that the principals in their buildings needed to have a conversation with at least a few of these staff members. So I think we need to be very aware of every time we make an ask of an administrator, what that really means. I don't think it's not fair. It doesn't feel good. And it's hard to come back from those hard conversations, even if it's just like, oh, they were just curious to see. So my hope going forward is if we are going to put our building leaders in a position to have these conversations, that we at least let them know, like, we're not really going to take it up as a consideration. We would just like to know and be aware so that they can preface their conversations that they have with their staff so that they aren't feeling afraid and they aren't feeling fearful.
Go ahead, Al.
I would just say, I hark back to something that Bob said. Every time we have a conversation like this, it's worse and worse for the morale of the people that are hearing the message. So on the board, I was not in favor of us coming to the committee to say, here, fine $500,000, but was outvoted on that. So I can't say that I would. I mean, yes, I'm a member of the board, so that is what we were directed to the committee. So yes, that is what we asked the administrators to do. But again, I would say not a great practice. Morale has been harmed and will continue to be harmed. And I understand the Band-Aid, right? We're talking about this, and for you, obviously, Keegan, it feels like a Band-Aid, and you'd rather apply, let's see, how many teachers would we want to lose? 1, 2, 3 teachers at the elementary school. 1, 2, is that 4 or 5 teachers? And that's something that you're comfortable with, that. I just want to ask you, you're comfortable with what is right here?
You know, I am not comfortable ever talking about the end of someone's professional career. I would never be comfortable with that. But I think we're in a point where if we're going to save this budget and we're going to fix our spending practices and we're going to address the property tax needs, then we need to be okay with at least having those real conversations, but knowing that every time we have those conversations, if we don't start making decisions and standing by them, then we're just going to continue to be, well, what if? Well, what if? How do you feel about this? That is just as damaging as saying, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. This is the situation that we're in and we can't afford it.
I think part of this conversation, you know, it becomes also like Keegan, you were talking about how we, you know, this
Conversations can do.
your focus is the tax rate and the spending and that, And you know, I'm not an educator. I've been on the board for, you know, better than 10 years. I still, you know, I don't even pretend to know what I'm doing, education wise. But I don't think, just my common sense tells me that to lose a teacher in every elementary school, and then to lose 3 teachers at Leland and Gray and programs and all of that, you know, while that may be really good for the tax rate, I don't think that serves our students very well at all. And I think that, you know, the fix, there are 2 possible fixes. You can either take the fix where we just start trimming from, you know, we run 4 schools. We can trim every one of those 4 schools down and take bits and pieces away from them, you know, an administrator, a teacher, a program, you know, and we can continue to do that going forward and continue to try and run the 4 schools on a shoestring budget. Or we can step back and look at how we philosophically deliver education and say, running 3 elementary schools where we duplicate efforts in 3 places used to make sense, but it doesn't anymore. And we spent months having those conversations and backed away from all of it because there wasn't enough savings. There wasn't enough time to talk to the community about it. We couldn't have meetings because of the pandemic. And so we agreed to back off of that entire conversation. And I don't think the answer now is to go slashing through staff, and because we're not going to put that back. That would be, you know, that essentially makes Jamaica a 1-room schoolhouse with 1 teacher and no administrator. I don't think this is the answer. I think this shows us that it's not the answer, and that the answer is to mitigate the tax rate this year and say, look, we have to change how we do this, or this is the conversation we're going to have. And we'll just, you know, the next time it will be slash and burn. You know, it'll be find us this much and its staff. And when you find it, support that recommendation as well, because, you know, that's what's going to happen. We're, you know, this is showing us that we're out of options. I'm with Al. I didn't want to take $500,000 out of the budget. I think if we can take 300,000, I do remember, not this year, but last year when we, you know, hit pause and said, go find us more cuts, and we took out the building maintenance and we took out everything else. One of the recommendations that Bill made then was to go from 3 to 2 elementary administrators, which is a savings of $100,000, and share that duty because of the reduced student load. I mean, that could be something he could look at again. You know, but you know, I think that it would be, well, it would frustrate me equally to just say, well, here's $500,000, start writing RIF notices. Bill.
So if I can sum up the conversation in my attempt, it sounds like the budget committee is not at a point where they would like to recommend any reductions that were presented by the principals under the direction of the board, under the direction of the superintendent, but that the will of the budget committee is to recommend to the board $300,000 be reduced from the existing budget, where $200,000 comes from a surplus that is estimated at $570,000 currently, and $100,000 to be directed by the superintendent, not to be defined as on page 1 or not on page 1. And I am more than willing to accept that responsibility. Is that what I am hearing from the will of the budget committee?
Al, go ahead.
So the 300,000, I think at least three of us collectively agree on that. Lori and others, thank you for kindly reminding us that, yes, this is a very skinny budget. I believe it was a 1.5% increase, even though that's not reflected in the unified tax rate. And that there's not much, if any, to pull from it. And honestly, I was dismayed that it didn't include what I thought it did, which was the recommendation to work on the columns at Leland and Gray. So that is kind of disheartening, because that was the meaning between looking at potential of 10 years for Leland and Gray, or maybe extending it to 15 plus years, if we were able to get the data in a year from now. So that kind of concerns me. And Lori, what was that number again for that, the columns?
That's why it's not in there, because we don't have a number yet.
Okay.
Chris has made contact with engineers that will put out an RFP to do that job, but
I thought they estimated it at like 25,000 or 30,000.
I thought it was like 32 was the estimate.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like-
Yeah, and that is
And
not
then-
something we would include in the budget. We would just spend it, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Lori said it might be in the CapEx fund or something.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So anyway, given that, I wanted to maybe revise or amend the motion to be the 300,000, but from reserve entirely, or I mean, if there, I don't know if there's anything that could be pulled from elsewhere, but just maybe targeting that $300,000 number. Does that sound fair, Mike or Joe?
So you're saying you're asking him to look for low hanging fruit and take it if he can get it, and then if
Yeah.
he can't get it.
Right. Total together 300,000.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask a question. You said from page one or not from page one?
Yeah, so the administrator that was contemplated last year is 100 to 110,000. That's on page one. So I just want absolute clarity that the budget committee is looking for a recommendation and making a motion that they're looking for 300,000. And I think Al added a lot of clarity just there. And is it the target number is 300,000, and then as Mike expressed, go ahead and find some low-hanging fruit that might be 38,000, it might be 22,000, it might be 48,000. But what are the parameters of that low-hanging fruit? Because everything will affect our teachers, our students, and our community. So you either need to give me direction, or you just need to say, we can't give that to you. Go ahead and find it.
So would you say that there's not a single penny that could be pulled that will not have a programmatic or effect on the budget?
No, of course there's pennies. I could
Okay.
take maintenance and shave it, and I could take this and shave it. I could take that and shave it. But I just want to remind you all that that's what we did last year, and it just, to quote, it kicks the can down the road. I will deliver unto my employers what you want me to deliver. I just want to make sure that I am hearing correctly what I should be hearing. And I think Lori has some points she wants to make, and she's doing it very politely.
Go ahead, Lori.
Well, I just want to give you context. So last year we cut 25% of all supplies, right? So to get to a number. So I just looked up in this particular budget, not including anything in building ops, the supplies come to $117,000, right? 4 buildings, that's not a lot of supply money. So to give you context of what low hanging fruit means. It means somebody doesn't get Band-Aids and that type of thing, right? The only other place to pull it from, like we did last year, where there is more money that sitting there, is in the building ops. And that means deferred maintenance. Small projects that need to be done on a yearly basis don't get done, or the HVAC system that you just, the gift that was just given to you doesn't get maintained. So it's just critical that we understand where you want that low hanging fruit to come from, because there just isn't a lot of it.
Well, I mean, if there is no low hanging fruit, I was, I don't think I think if there are things on page 1 that make sense, if there's one little thing on there that makes sense, one amount or one thing where you say, you know what, we really could make this work and it wouldn't really be a big deal, or it wouldn't be a major impact, and it helps, then go ahead and dip into page 1. Do I want to implement all of page 1? No, I don't think you do either. But I wouldn't rule out page 1, because I hear Lori and Bill saying, low hanging fruit, we took that years ago. There isn't anymore. And, cutting supplies by 10% is going to be, $10,000 and not even matter. And it's just going to be more inconvenient than helpful. So, I mean, find that where you can. Make, it's not giving you an easy task, but we reduced the number by 80%. And Keegan has her hand up.
I'm just, what I think I hear some agreement around is that dollar amount for us to get to the goal that Al and Joe and Mike are referring to. I think we need to verbally recognize that that does mean us a position, right? A staff member is what we're talking about here. And I think if we can, it hurts and it doesn't feel good to say, and someone is going to have a horrible experience, they're going to have a real bad day. But I think we as a board need to own that decision. So when we say, oh, we'll leave it up to Bill, that's kind of an unfair task. If we're not willing to say up to and including position, up to and including staffing, then we need to be, we're a team, right? We're a board, we're working together, we have common vision and common goal. I'm hearing that we don't have $100,000 in low hanging fruit. So I think we need to recognize that we're talking a staff member, we're talking a position, and it's unfortunate, but we as a board are asking Bill and the ad team to have that conversation. And I think we need to be very clear in recognizing that that's what we're saying. Don't be afraid of it. It's not fun. No one wants to have the conversation, but I think we owe it to our staff. We owe it to our community to be honest and to own those words. I don't know if that's just me, but it means a lot to me, because if we're talking about low-hanging fruit and then ultimately that becomes a conversation about someone's position, that's not going to feel very good either, because no person that works with our kids is low-hanging fruit. But what we're asking for is substantial beyond that.
I think you're right. No person is low-hanging fruit. Go ahead, Bill. Bill?
I just want to echo what Keegan said, that we're talking people. Let's just be honest. I'm more than willing to be the employee that has to deliver the news of structural change. That is my responsibility, but I appreciate the transparency that that is exactly what we're talking about. And you employ me, you hire evaluate me. I get to work with wonderful colleagues, and part of my job is to deliver uncomfortable truths at times. And I appreciate the opportunity to say that that is what will happen. And that has to happen sometimes. Just be honest about it. And I will take that responsibility. I will deliver to the budget committee and the board a recommendation. And I just think it's important that be noted.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Mike,
Actually, no, I hit the button by accident.
right? Not Mike. All right, anything else? Bill, you have the clarity you wanted?
I'm just waiting for a motion from the budget committee to the full board that includes very specific recommendations and directions to me, as well as combining that with the end of the one-term solutions and the commitment for a long-term solution would be my preference.
Al, you want to try that one? Or Mike, you want to try that one?
I was just gonna say, I'm not sure that, I mean, we can make the motion surely, but I'm really wondering if this whole conversation is, like, get more direction from the board next week. I know we normally come out of committees with recommendations, but I'd kind of like to see how the rest of the board feels about what we're talking about, which we will. I mean, there's no harm in bringing a recommendation next week. But I'd kind of like to, get more input on it, because it feels like we're starting to get outside of committee purview when we're talking riffs.
Bill, go ahead. Oh, Bill.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so the $200,000 from reserve and $100,000 from not reserve involves RIFs. So I appreciate Mike's clarity in understanding the recommendation that would be necessary for the budget committee to make to the full board. And Mike, thank you for bringing that up, because the thinking I'm going to have to do between now and the 19th is critical. And so the clarity and preciseness of the motion from the budget committee will direct my actions for the next 6 days.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, so that was why I was trying to amend my motion to just capture the 300,000 in the reserve, and since there is no low-hanging fruit, yeah, I mean, I would like to make it now just the 300,000.
I'm okay, as this person who seconded that, I'm okay with that.
So the motion would be then 300,000 from the reserve with no contemplation of any cuts in the budget?
Yes, I would like to allude to what Mike said earlier. Maybe the board as a whole will feel differently after they see some of these potential cuts, but I don't feel comfortable discussing RIF, maybe just targeting the number of the 300,000.
Then I don't even think we need a motion necessarily, because that's a much different commitment to have written down. I mean, we can go back to the board and say, we this is what we looked at, this is what we talked about, this is what we think the short-term solution is this, but there are also these other pathways that we didn't feel comfortable as a budget committee having the work done on because it involves personnel, and we're not going to suggest that without talking to the entire board. Is that accurate, committee? Bill?
Yeah, that kind of hits the sentiment that I was thinking. Yeah.
Bill? You put your hand up again. Go ahead. Oh, you put your hand down. Okay.
Oh, I just would love for a connection to a commitment to whatever decision is made in this current year, that a commitment is made that beginning in April 2021, that long-term planning and hard structural conversations are engaged with no outcome predetermined, but the willingness that is absolutely necessary to do so.
I'll make that motion for you, Bill, because I think it's very important for us to have that long-term, long vision plan, and having those hard conversations and being real and being honest with not only ourselves, but with our kids, with our staff, and with our communities.
I'll
So,
second that.
thanks, Leanne.
Okay. Any discussion, any further discussion on that? Keegan, you want to speak to it?
I just think it's very important that we recognize we're thinking about our kids, and we want what's best for our students, and we want what's best for our community, and we want what's best for our staff. We want everyone to feel connected and to feel good and to have pride. And if we're coming back to the carving table every spring saying, what can we got to shave a little away. We have declining enrollment. We're losing money here. We can't afford this. We're over the threshold. We're having all of these other things going on. We are not doing something that our kids can be proud of. We are band-aiding our way into a problem that we will have no ability to overcome. So we do need to be committed to having a long-term plan. We do need to have structure around what those long-term benchmarks and motion making looks like. The hard conversation is step one. Action steps are going to come later, and I know that they're going to be hard, and I know that we're not there yet. But I think we owe it to our kids, and we owe it to staff. We owe it to future staff who might be interested in joining our school district. But if they don't see that they have a long-term viable option for employment, or families don't think they have a long-term viable option for education, and our taxpayers don't see a long-term viable option for home ownership, then all of this work that we're afraid to do, or that we haven't done, or that makes us uncomfortable, or that has been long building for many, many years, it's not going to help. It's not going to solve itself. So it's important. I'm on board. I care about this community. I care about the kids. We need to have much larger conversations with our community. And I want to make that happen so that we don't have to have conversations like this again. We owe it to the kids to do better. Leanne, do you want to share any thoughts? My second.
I agree with you that we need a long-term vision. We need an actual capital plan with money each year going towards capital improvements on our buildings. We need a direction for the schools that's going to be more sustainable than where we're at now. I mean, we've already cut everything that you can cut. And it's not that spending's up, revenues are down, so we have to figure out an alternative. And that's pretty much my thoughts.
Anyone else? All right. Bill.
I just want to say, I've talked a lot tonight, and I so appreciate the challenge of the elected officials by their neighbors, by their citizens, to tackle generational problems. And you guys are in the middle of the hourglass. You know, whatever came before you, you're tight in the middle of that hourglass. And you're going to have to make some tough decisions to expand the world for the next generation. And I know you all, each individually, personally, and I appreciate your commitment and I know the challenge that is ahead for you and for all of us. And I appreciate the conversation tonight, and I look forward to working with you to move forward for our communities and our students and for the future.
On that note, we can vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Give me a thumbs up. All right. Motion passes. Aaron, do you have the language of that motion, or can you get it from the recording so that we have it written down? I'm going to go with sure. Lori.
Wait.
Who's you
What
wanna
is the motion?
There were two
I really like to know
motions.
what the motion is.
Yeah, there were two motions, and the first one you didn't vote on, I don't think, which was Al's, which I don't know if it was matters. But I just wanted to ask for some clarity for next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, Al's motion kind of went away and we didn't really even need a motion anymore. I mean, we can vote on it or not, but it really kind of evaporated from much of an action step.
So it's more of a direction to place $300,000 from the reserve in the building of the budget. That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
So that is the budget that I will present to the full board next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
And motion number 2, I would head back to Keegan and make sure that it is what Keegan and Leanne are trying to communicate.
Okay.
So for clarification, beginning in April of 2021, we as a board commit to long-term planning, long-term visioning, and having hard, complex, and very important conversations with ourselves and with our communities around the future direction and vision of the West River School District, such that we don't have to have these conversations over and over and over. So can I actually have a question about the plan. So are we now just moving 300, we're infusing $300,000 from the reserve fund into the budget, and that's going to go towards mitigating the cost of the columns and that sort of thing? Or I'm just
No, that's going to buy down the tax rate. The columns is going to come out of another pocket. What was the source of that, Lori?
Potentially there's a little bit in the capital fund that came in when you merged. It's between $50,000 and $60,000. So.
Right.
Okay.
So that doesn't even get budgeted, was what Bill had said. We would just spend that money. That doesn't get budgeted.
Okay.
Because we already had it.
So then for clarification, just so I understand, and when we're working on our communication piece for preparing, the budget numbers remain as they are with an infusion of $300,000 from the reserves. There are no cuts. There are no changing in staffing. There is no changing in programming. It's just an infusion of money to buy down the tax rate, which would get it to a projected, is this the $2.07, $2.10, $2.12, something in
You
that?
have to wait until Lori runs the numbers to get that, to communicate it out.
210. Right, as things stand right now, right? When yields change and equalized pupils change, that will change.
All right.
And this shouldn't be communicated at all until the board makes a decision. We're the budget committee. We recommend to the board until the board actually decides that that's going to happen. This is just an academic exercise.
Okay. Well, I like to have notes and know what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
I think the only other question then that I have, yeah, I'll hold it. Thank you very much.
Okay. So you got what you need, Bill? Lori? Bill left the screen.
I'm back. I was
Okay.
lost for about 90 seconds there.
Okay, got what you need?
So I apologize. I'll recap. 300,000 is going to be transferred from reserves into the building of the next budget, which we will present. Well, really, Lori will present on the 19th to the board, and no other action is required of the administration at this point. And Keegan made a motion, which was seconded by Leanne, which is asking for a commitment of a recommendation from the budget committee to the board starting in April of 2021 to build long-term planning budgets so that we do not repeat this exercise next year.
I think you've got it.
Then I am good.
All right. So the last piece on the agenda that I wanted to talk about was communications and how this got communicated out once the full board got on there. I saw today on Facebook the infographic that was prepared by the communications committee. My understanding was that we were going to discuss that infographic tonight and then potentially release it post discussion. Did some wires get crossed there?
Well, I was under the impression that that was the first draft, and it kind of broke down what was discussed when we met in December and what it all meant, just as it was. I shared it with the communications committee. We hashed it all out. Our communications liaison reviewed it. It was passed on to the executive team. It was reviewed and edited following some feedback from Lori. No one said not to share it, so I assumed that it was okay because it was the results of what our meeting was all about. If you would prefer to be very clear in future shares of information, like do not send out until, I'm happy to follow those directions.
No, we just have to sort of come up with the way that's going to work. Just for my own edification, I actually I was thinking that we were reviewing this tonight, and I was going to ask for more explanation in the bottom part of that communications thing. I don't think that those bullet points are. I would have a hard time explaining what those bullet points actually mean to one of my constituents, and I chair the budget committee and sit on the board. So I think that putting that out to the general public might cause some confusion, or it certainly leaves things open to interpretation. So I was just going to ask for a little more, or perhaps if these are bullet points, they should, and they're shared on the web primarily, they could be links to more detail and more explanation of what information is put there. Those were my only comments on this as a draft, is that I thought we could flesh those things out a little bit because I wasn't quite sure what they all meant.
Okay, thanks for that feedback.
And I don't know if it's possible, since these are web-based, to put that as a link underneath, or how you want to do it. But so going forward, I guess that probably less out of this meeting, because we haven't really made a significant change other than the fact that, we're strongly recommending, to the point where we had a motion and adopted it, that future planning begin April of 2021. I think that needs to be played up in any sort of a communication. And I think that in terms of the budget committee's communication piece of that, I would say that, that commitment, because of that commitment, knowing that the current way that we're running things as a board isn't sustainable, that we're willing to do the 1-year buy down of the tax and commit to this future planning. And that, we even had some suggestions from the administration on how future planning could work. But, give people a taste of the conversations that we intend to have going forward. I think we'll see some of the 11 permutations of building consolidation and changes coming back too. Because, we about covered every option we have. Anything else about, any other thoughts on communicating? I mean, you know, we, as a committee, we probably don't communicate a ton, but the board communicates on the budget. And, you know, it really would be the board communicating out through the communications committee, not the budget committee, I think. At least that's my thought on it, because I don't think committees communicate their own business except to the board. But Al, was your hand up? Because Bill's hand's up too. Go ahead, Al, and then Bill.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that I think it's a beautiful, striking infographic. I really liked it. But also I was under the same notion. Bill's email said we should probably run this by the budget committee. So same, I hadn't seen it on Facebook, so I wasn't aware that it had been published. And similarly, I sort of understood some of the sentiments of the bullet points in the bottom, but not entirely. So yeah, that would have been great to kind of flesh out. But everything else above, very clear, very organized in terms of the expenditures, the revenues, and then the unified tax rate, all of that very good, very impactful. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, I agree. Bill, go ahead. Waiting for Bill.
And their colleague Suzanne Paw for creating the.
You need to start again, Bill, because you were gone for the first part of that.
Am I talking?
You are talking now.
I just want to thank the Communications Committee and Suzanne Paw for creating a web and fun to navigate, but I apparently am not getting through, so I will stop talking.
We heard that part.
We got thank you and the Communications Committee and Suzanne. I missed the last name. Paw.
She's on the call.
And I don't think she's on screen one for me. So,
well, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. WestRiverEd.org. Good stuff. Easily navigable, easily populated, easily shared. Really good design. Really good plan. Very much appreciate the efforts putting forward.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else, folks? I think we've done this enough.
One more motion.
One more motion.
I'll make it. Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor? Leave. All right. Thank you all. I think we did good work tonight.